John Sonny Franzese Sr. Italian. Modifier letter vertical line Franci, modifier letter triangular colon Z, E, modifier letter triangular colon Say, February 6, 1917. February 24, 2020 was an Italian-American mobster who was a longtime member and underboss of the Colombo crime family. Franzese's career in organized crime began in the 1930s and spanned over 8 decades. He served as underboss of the Colombo family from 1963 until he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for bank robbery charges in 1967. He was paroled in 1978, but was rejailed at least 6 times on parole violations throughout the decades that followed. He became Colombo family underboss again in 2005, until he was convicted of extortion in 2011, and sentenced to 8 years in prison. His son John Franzese Jr. had testified against him, becoming the first son of a New York mobster to turn state's evidence and testify against his father. At the time of his release on June 23, 2017, at the age of 100, he was the oldest federal inmate in the United States and the only centenarian in federal custody. He died in a New York City hospital on February 24, 2020, at the age of 103. Rise in the Colombo crime family. Franzese was born in Naples, Italy, to Carmine Franzese and Maria Corvola on February 6, 1917, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. His parents had already immigrated to the United States at the time of his birth, and were back in Italy for a visit. After 6 months, his family returned with Franzese to their Greenpoint, Brooklyn home. His father ran a bakery there. His mother had given him the nickname Sonny at a young age. In the late 1930s, Franzese worked under Joseph Profaci, boss of the Profaci crime family, later named the Colombo crime family. His first arrest came in 1938, for assault. In 1942, in the midst of World War II, he was drafted to the United States Army, but was discharged later that year classified as psychoneurotic with pronounced homicidal tendencies. Court papers accused him of committing rape against a waitress in 1947, but was never arrested in relation to the crime. Franzese operated out of New York City and New Jersey and was involved in racketeering, fraud, and loan sharking. He was also a regular at the Copacabana and met with such stars as Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. on a frequent basis. He was also a boxing fan of Rocky Graziano. He became a made man in 1950, and served in the crew of Sebastian "Buster" Alloy, father of former Colombo family acting boss Vincenzo Alloy. He is believed to have been elevated to caporegime or captain in the Colombo family in the mid-1950s by Profaci. By 1963, he had been promoted to underboss by boss Joseph Colombo. In the 1950s and 60s, Franzese listed his official occupation as an owner of a dry cleaning store in Brooklyn. In 1967, Franzese gained a financial interest in a new recording company, Butter Records. Franzese used Butter to launder illegal mob earnings and to bribe disc jockeys with payola. He also infiltrated and began to make money through the owner of Cala Records, Nate McCalla, until the recording label ceased operations in 1977, and McCalla was murdered execution style in 1980. Trial and conviction. He was accused of murdering Genovese crime family hitman turned informant Ernest Rupolo in 1964 on the orders of Vito Genovese. Rupolo was shot and stabbed several times before his feet were attached to 2 concrete blocks and his hands tied before being dumped into Jamaica Bay. He was arrested in 1966, and during his trial, the prosecution produced records that claimed that Franzese had killed between 30 and 50 people. Franzese was later acquitted of the murder. However, on March 3, 1967, Franzese was convicted in Albany, New York of masterminding a series of 4 bank robberies across the country in 1965, and was finally sentenced to 50 years in prison at United States Penitentiary, Leavenworth, by Judge Jacob Mishler in 1970. After several denied appeals, his son, Michael, alleged that when Michler sentenced his father, Franzese declared, "You watch. I'm gonna do the whole 50. Franzese's nephew, Salvatore Franzese, reportedly headed Franzese's gambling operations while Franzese was in prison. In 1978, Franzese was released on parole but returned to prison in 1982 for a parole violation. In 1984, Franzese was released on parole again. Until 2008, he was never charged with another crime, although he would return to prison on parole violations on at least 6 occasions. Workshop on Murder in 2006, Franzese discussed techniques for mob murders with Gaetano Guy Furtado, a Colombo associate, not realizing that Furtado was a government informant and taping the conversation. Franzese told Furtado, "I killed a lot of guys. You're not talking about 4, 5, 6, 10. Franzese also told Furtado that he put nail polish on his fingertips before a murder to avoid leaving fingerprints at the crime scene. Franzese also suggested wearing a hairnet during the murder so as to avoid leaving any hair strands at the crime scene that could be DNA analyzed. Finally, Franzese stressed the importance of properly dealing with the corpse. His procedure was to dismember the corpse in a kiddie pool, dry the severed body parts in a microwave oven, and then run the parts through a commercial-grade garbage disposal." Franzese observed, "Today, you can't have a body no more. It's better to take that half an hour, to get rid of the body than it is to leave the body on the street." Indictments and final sentence. After the 2004 incarceration of John Jackie DeRoss, Franzese was again promoted to Colombo family underboss in 2005, for the first time since his 1967 imprisonment by Thomas Jooli. However, in May 2007, Franzese was again returned to prison for a parole violation. In June 2008, Franzese, still incarcerated, was indicted on charges of participating in murders during the Colombo Wars of the early 1990s, stealing fur coats in New York City in the mid-1990s, and participating in home invasions by police impersonators in Los Angeles in 2006. On June 4, 2008, Franzese was indicted along with other Colombo mobsters on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, robbery, extortion, narcotics trafficking, and loan sharking. On December 24, 2008, Franzese was released from the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. According to law enforcement, Franzese remained the official underboss of the Colombo family. Franzese's son, John Franzese Jr. became a government informant. Franzese Jr. was allegedly also responsible for his father's 4th parole violation, but was accepted back into his confidence after denying the allegations in tears, saying, "I would never do that, no matter what kind of trouble I had." In 2005, Franzese Jr. wore a wire around his father. John Franzese Jr. testified twice against his father, the last time his father attempted to have him killed. He later lived under witness protection. In 2010, Franzese Jr. admitted that he received $50,000 from the FBI as a cooperating witness. He is the first son of a New York mobster to turn state's evidence and testify against his father. Franzese had been dubbed the Nodfather for snoozing during his trial. With the help of Franzese Jr.'s testimony, the 93-year-old Franzese Sr., on January 14, 2011, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for extorting 2 Manhattan strip clubs, running a loan shark operation, and extorting a pizzeria on Long Island. Prosecutors had asked for a sentence of 12 years, while Franzese's lawyer asked for leniency based on a variety of ailments, including partial blindness and deafness, gout, and heart and kidney problems. Franzese was denied compassionate release in July 2016. Franzese was released from the Federal Medical Center in Devens, Massachusetts, on June 23, 2017, at the age of 100. He was the oldest federal inmate in the United States and the only centenarian in federal custody at the time of his release. That year also marked the end of Franzese's original 50-year sentence for bank robbery that was the cause of his many parole violations over the years. Movie business. Franzese is listed as an associate producer of the 2003 film This Thing of Ours, which stars James Caan. He also helped to finance the $22,000 budget of the 1972 pornographic film Deep Throat, which generated $50 million, and the 1974 slasher film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which earned over $30 million from a $80,000 to $140,000 investment. Family and death. Franzese was married to a woman, with whom he had 3 children. While married, John had gotten the 16-year-old Christina Capobianco, a cigarette girl at the Stork Club in Manhattan, pregnant with his son Michael Franzese, so Capobianco married Frank Grillo to avoid having a scandal surrounding having a child out of wedlock. After the mob allowed John to divorce his first wife, Grillo disappeared, and he married Capobianco. Due to this, Michael had initially believed that he had been adopted by John after his mother divorced Grillo, who Michael thought to be his biological father. He had 4 more children with Capobianco. Christina Capobianco. Franzese died in 2012. Franzese had 8 children, 18 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. Michael Franzese had entered a pre-med program in 1969 as John Franzese originally did not want him to be involved in organized crime. However, in 1971, Franzese decided to drop out of college to help his family earn money when his father was sentenced to 50 years in prison for bank robbery in 1967. After he was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1986, Michael was ultimately released in 1994, retired to California in 1995, and became a born-again Christian. His younger son, John Franzese Jr., was a Colombo family associate before becoming an FBI informant. On June 23, 2017, Franzese was released and returned home. In 2019, Franzese Jr. met with his father at the nursing home where he resided and reconciled with him. John Jr. had previously voluntarily left the witness protection program. Franzese died in a New York City hospital on February 24, 2020, aged 103. He was buried on February 28 at St. John's Cemetery following his funeral at Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Notes. References. External links. John Franzese on IMDb.